Pubs are closing down, costs are rising, but at the same time, there's some great, incredible beer being brewed. So where is the UK beer culture really heading right now? And what does it mean for the pints you drink and the places you drink them? Find out more in this episode with CAMRA Chairman Ash. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Beer Rep Chats With. And today I'm delighted to be joined again by Chairman for CAMRA, Ash. Ash, thank you very much for joining the show and coming back. I must have made a good impression the first time round.
Yeah, thanks for having me. No, I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. It's great to have you on. So it's been, last time we spoke was around May, I think, last year. So yeah, what's changed at CAMRA since then?
Anyone who's sort of been aware of kind of what CAMRA's been up to the last year will probably already know it's a really difficult year for us. We sort of weathered many storms, a perfect combination of, unfortunately, Great British Beer Festival was unsuccessful, not from a campaigning point of view, but just simply financially. I think we've learned now, and the announcement that we're not going to sort of do that again, what we've learned is I don't think there is a world for that sort of festival anymore. I just don't think this very large-scale festival works. Actually, the smaller regional and local ones are much more successful. And we know that's right across the industry with peers who are also organising sort of events struggling. But we had a bit of a perfect storm because that was coupled with, unfortunately, realisation of the size of CAMRA. We've been operating as a 200,000 member organisation since COVID, sort of going, we'll get back to that point, right? And we just haven't. We've hovered around 150,000, which is still, a fantastic number of people who support and love real ale and pubs, but is not the 50,000 extra we used to have. Yeah. And unfortunately, that has financial implications. And then ultimately, we've been trying to move office at the same time. Something we've been doing for years. Actually, it's very, very important because now we've moved office, our operational costs drop right down. But, buying a property when you've not sold your last one, which was the issue, sort of ties all your money up into the new property and not releasing it. So we sort of had all those hit last summer. And it became a very difficult kind of 6 months to the end of 2025, where unfortunately we had to take some really tough decisions. That did involve, unfortunately, making some of the staff redundant and really sort of having an honest conversation with ourselves about what is it CAMRA's trying to achieve, and then sort of planning from there what resource do we have and how are we going to do that.
Yeah. Was there discussions to maybe move the Great British Beer Festival to a smaller venue?
So nothing was off the table. So when we originally didn't have the festival the year before last, where we had that fallow year because there were issues with the venue we previously used, we sort of said to the organisers, blank piece of paper, where do you want to have it? What sort of festival do you want to do? And what do you think is most likely to be successful? We were open to all possibilities. And what they came up with was the NEC, recognising that, it has its foibles. It's not in the centre of a city. It's not going to get that passing trade. We're going to have to focus more on getting people who are sort of planning to go and then definitely making that trip. But it was ultimately probably the right choice versus some of the other venues we looked at. When we decided to cancel after last year's event, and that was a really tough decision, but we did look at going, okay, what else could we do with it? But I think if you make it too small, it sort of doesn't live up to its name. You sort of have to do a Great British Beer Festival that is great. Otherwise, it is sort of just a normal beer festival. And we already run 2 festivals, I think maybe 3 that are larger than the Great British Beer Festival already. So Nottingham, Cambridge, Peterborough are our 3 sort of biggest festivals. And actually, what we've recognised is supporting those to keep growing and maybe helping other festivals to get up to that size that are existing and established is probably the right route to go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always attend my regional CAMRA festival in Bexley. It's always around my birthday in May. So I always go down to that. It's lovely. It's beautiful. Great, nice event, big open space. And hopefully the sun comes out as well, which is...
That can be the hardest thing. Some of these festivals where we have them outdoors and all the planning in the world and all the amazing beer, and then the skies open up and here comes the rain and you go, it's going to be half the attendance we expected. And you just can't plan for that because, it can chuck it down in July just as much as September, October.
It certainly can, yeah. So you said you're taking a lot of cutbacks, etc. So what have you used to try and improve from the past year?
So what we've sort of tried to do is focus. It's that honest conversation about what is it CAMRA can actually achieve and what are we trying to achieve. An organisation when it gets to 55 years old, as we did not last week, the week before, you sort of just grow organically, and enthusiasm of members means you start picking up bits and pieces here and there of all the different things people want to do. And, a lot of it does benefit pubs and benefits, drinkers. And so you do it because it's a good idea. But what we did was we kind of got the team together and we said, okay, what is it we're trying to, what are our actual outcomes? And then what are the activities we do towards that actually are making a difference? And unfortunately, that did mean, some very kind of honest conversations about, well, X activity is really interesting and fun and people love it, but it's not actually making a difference for what CAMRA is trying to achieve. So we had to kind of get rid of those. But we've not launched our new strategy yet. That starts in members weekend. That's coming up in a couple of months, or next month actually in St Albans. And what we'll do is we'll present to the membership and say, this is what we're doing for the next 3 years. This is what we're trying to achieve. It's leaner, it's more focused, but actually, even though it's less, we're hoping we can achieve more simply by focusing on things. That's really important. I think one of the hardest things we always have is people say, well, what is it CAMRA's trying to do? Or what are you trying to achieve? And what are you doing at the minute? And it's very easy to say, a million things, and you try and rattle off the 20 you can remember at that one point. But actually, what I want to achieve is that not only our members, but people who know CAMRA will also sort of have a paragraph they can sort of go, I know what CAMRA's trying to do. They're trying to do this, and if it works, they achieve this. And if you can say that very succinctly, then people know what we're trying to do. And then when volunteers, when they're given that autonomy to go off and do things, and go, right, I should do X because I know it's going to achieve towards our aim.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like a great plan. Anything that you can tell CAMRA members what to expect at the AGM?
Yeah, so I think, without wanting to spoil it, because you've got to be very careful these things. You say too much and then people complain that, I didn't hear it because it came through this source. So we have to make sure we tell everyone at once very carefully.
Like an exclusive, Ash.
Yeah. I think for me, what I really focus on, we came from it from two sides. Tom Stainer, our chief executive, led a context of CAMRA strategy review. So that was looking at, how do we make decisions better and talk about our resources. So we're going to focus really on helping people to understand what exactly resources available and how that's going to work. And unfortunately, what isn't available and making that clearer. And then at my side and the rest of the national executive colleagues, what we focused on was our campaigning. And actually, so we looked at, and it's not wholesale change. So it is saying, okay, we want to campaign for drinkers. What are the three things, things like the draft duty relief that needs to be protected and increased. To help pubs, it needs to be about getting VAT relief, business rates. None of these things are new, but they're things we really need to focus on. And what I will say is, we've recognised, and we're still definitely going to do festivals. Actually, I think there's going to be more focus on festivals. I think it used to be that festivals were a thing we did alongside. And what we've recognised is, no, that's where we make most of the money that we use them for campaigning. And it's where we do the most recruitment. So we absolutely have to have festivals front and centre as something we encourage at health branches to do. So I'm hoping what people experience is they get a bit more clarity on what they're trying to achieve, and then also the support they can get to do it.
Yeah, and obviously because you're not doing the Great British Beer Festival, all the money that you would normally use for that, you can pump into advertising for the smaller festivals and get them really live and doing well. We're gonna touch a bit on choice of beers in pubs, independents as well as publicly owned ones. Independent pubs as well as ones owned by pubcos, brewers, etc. Do you think the illusion of choice in pubs is still a problem at the moment?
I think it's a huge problem. Whenever I sort of speak at any other events at Beer X the other week, things like that, access to market and the illusion of choice is probably the phrase that I use most, because I think that is one of, if not the biggest problem that consumers particularly are facing at the moment. So I know there was a study last year, I think it was with SEBA, where they got stats that said, 3/4 of drinkers say that a pub serving local beer is one of the most important things they can do. But unfortunately, brewers then told them that 60% of pub lines are just not accessible to them. So there is a disconnect there. We've got consumers saying they want to drink local and drink independent and have choice. And we've got brewers saying they can't provide that. And so one of those has to give. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's consumers who are rightly voting with their feet sometimes and saying, well, I can't get the interesting beers I want to have, so I'm not going to go down the pub. I prefer it the other way around, where brewers are able to sell what they want and publicans can buy what they know their drinkers want to have so they can thrive. So, yeah, it's a really difficult problem at the moment. And I think that's been one of the successes recently, though, in sort of bringing attention to that. Because I think couple of years ago, if you just said to people, oh, the illusion of choice, and do you think you're able to get good quality independent beers? I think they'd have said, yeah, there's plenty on at my local, a couple of interesting casks, a couple of interesting kegs. But I think we're starting to kind of get ground there of saying, well, actually, that isn't choice because those brands are all owned by the same conglomerate that's bought them up, or, that's the global brewer who's pretending to give you choice by, using the name of an indie or a local that they bought up.
Yeah.
There's people are sometimes approach me and they say, isn't there too many breweries? That's the problem. The market became saturated. And it's entirely the opposite. There is the market there from the drinker's point of view that they want to drink independent beer. Their problem is they don't have the access to do that. Brewers can't sell it and they can't buy it. And that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone likes to pop into their local. They don't want to have to keep going to different pubs to find these independent beers. So they just end up staying at the local, drinking the same global rubbish, and never get a chance to experience. Probably don't even know half or even 75% of independent breweries that are out there. Don't even know they exist.
Yeah,
and that's the really sad point.
It's a huge problem. Yeah, we know. This is why I live in Birmingham, and we know Birmingham is one of the cities that actually really struggles with access to market. We've got some fantastic brewers. 4 or 5, maybe a couple more small independents that have come up from people doing it as a hobby, and they've built up and they've got a tap room. And yes, you see their beers sometimes, particularly in restaurants, seem to be actually quite good at going, okay, we'll have one of their beers on. But when it comes to the pubs, because it was traditionally a city that was sort of controlled by 1 or 2 of the national brewers, there's just still isn't access because those pubs are now owned by the pubcos who don't want to really give space on the bar to what they see as competition.
Yeah, we'll touch on that a bit later on how independence, how we can find a common ground with them globals and pub companies to get more access to market for independent breweries. We'll touch on that a bit later on, so don't go away. Do you think that independents are gaining ground?
I think they're trying. I think they're gaining ground in people's minds, which unfortunately doesn't pay the bills. I think when it comes to actually gaining ground on taps and hand pulls around the country, unfortunately not. Because I think for every time they take a step forward and sort of get some success, one of the globals comes along and buys 2 or 3 of them, and suddenly it's 2 steps backwards. So
or the government smash up business rates and stuff like that just to make it even harder.
Yeah. Everything seems to be, I can't remember the name, but that Greek mythology, where it's pushing the thing up the hill forever. I think that's what it feels like to be, either side of the bar. If you're a publican, a brewer, a consumer, you sort of go, I'm trying to just get the thing I want. I'm doing my best efforts. I'm trying to brew a really good beer. I'm trying to sell it. I'm trying to sell it in my pub that drinkers want to have, and drinkers just want to go drink it. And they sort of go, no, here's another thing to make it worse. And it just keeps snowballing.
Yeah, the cards are definitely not in our favour at the moment, but hopefully that will change. Who knows? But talking about, obviously, there are a lot of different trade organisations, all representing their different clients. You've got the BBPA, the BII, SEBA, UK Hospitality, yourselves, just to name a few. How hard is it to find a common ground for what's best for pubs and hospitality as a whole?
I think it's not hard to find a common ground. It's sometimes harder to find a common solution. So we have regular conversations, and there's organisations we work very closely with in that sort of sphere, and there's ones we sort of keep friendly relations with just to see what they're thinking and stuff like that. And particularly last year when it came to the business rates in the budget and that shock that we got, everyone was straight away sort of almost singing from the same hymn sheet, saying, no, that's a problem. That's not what should be happening. This is going to have so many unintended consequences from the government. It's disastrous.
Affects everyone, doesn't it? So
yeah, what becomes difficult is then all sort of trying to agree on what the solution is, because they've all got a different idea, and that's fine. I'm not saying that anyone's solution is correct or that they can't sort of complement one another. And a good organizer, when you think about more pub-based ones, they want pubs to stay open regardless. And often, sometimes the answer to that actually might be selling more global macro lagers and things like that, because they'll go, well, look, they sell 1 billion pints of that every year in this country. If we can get more of that in and less tax on that, then we'll sell 2 billion of them, and that keep pubs afloat. Which is great if you're just trying to keep pubs open. But when it comes to CAMRA, we want pubs open, but serving interesting local quality beers. So we've got a slightly different solution where we say, no, what we need is support in this space. So we never tend to fall out of the organisations. It's always, conversations in a camaraderie spirit and trying to get to the same sort of conclusion. But yeah, where we find common ground, and SEBA is a good example where we've worked incredibly closely with them for the last 18 months, 2 years. because I think we're sort of almost fighting for exactly the same thing, because that independent local side of things is important to them as well. Whereas other organisations, it's a little bit more of a, we'll let you know what we're doing, they let us know what they're doing, and if we can support one another, great, we'll amplify it.
Yeah, it's always, yeah, like you said, finding a solution where everyone's happy unless things change. But it's one of them. It's one of them things, isn't it? I mean, we can fight as much as we want, but it's also you have to find that solution, that common solution, which unfortunately everyone has to be happy, not just what we want.
That's really important, because, I have conversations with people and they say, no, we can't compromise. We have to go for the very, very best solution for CAMRA. And I get that, because pubs are a passionate thing. None of us do this because of facts on a page or statistics. We do it because we're passionate about pubs and beer. So the emotion comes into that, and I can understand why they then want the very best solution. But unfortunately, if we deviate too much and you have all these different organisations shouting about very different things at the government, you then struggle about which one is the government going to listen to. And unfortunately, the locals, the independents, and the consumer side of things doesn't have the money and the pull of the big global organisations or those representing those with a lot of power. So we have to find the compromises where we go, okay, what is it they might be more amenable to, and maybe we'll go down that route. And sometimes it is being honest and saying, look, we disagree on this, and we're going to come out and say this. We'll be friends afterwards, or at least go for a beer, maybe not friends. But you find, pick your battles. Which is going to work? Where do we need to make a compromise to ultimately get as best a deal as we can for consumers?
Yeah, definitely. So where are you seeing what's working at the moment? What's working right now in these sort of conversations? I mean, obviously, business rates, everyone's on the same hymn sheet, as you said, with that. But is there any other areas that are working at the moment?
Working, yes, in the sense of we're talking, we've not achieved much yet. So it's difficult to say, is that working? You sort of go, well, ask me in 2 or 3 years' time if we've made a difference. I think what's working is that openness. I think when I first got involved in this sort of thing, there was not hostility, but maybe a sort of apprehension about working with each other. You'd conversations would be very, very high level, particularly at lower levels of volunteer level, or even just members of the public. They saw it as a very disparate industry, and people sort of arguing with each other. I think what is working is, working together that a little bit more, and accepting that we either work together and get some sort of solution, or we don't. So I think there's movement. I wouldn't say it's successful yet until we see some successes.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think we're at risk of losing more pubs this year?
Yes, that's a really sad answer, and I hate saying that so definitively, but absolutely. So all those things we've just talked about, consumers not being able to get what they want, and publicans not being able to sell what they want, which makes people less likely to go to pubs because you go out to get the thing you want. And then alongside that, all those things like business rates and stuff that are making it harder to run a pub or a brewery. And then I think on top of that, one of the things we've seen recently is actually the government wants to, forgot the word, but dilute. Dilute is the word I'm looking for. The government is looking to dilute the planning protection for pubs. So previously, one of the things CAMRA worked really hard for, and one of the successes, was making it really hard to convert a pub into another use. So even if it closed or anything like that, convert it to a different use, you had to demonstrate and jump through quite a few hoops, which has kept so many pubs in England open. And when we had the conversation actually with the Welsh government about what should they be doing about planning, we sort of pointed and said, well, England's got it right. Look at how the rate of pub closures and conversions has plummeted the moment that protection came in. But unfortunately, in a sort of trying to help the high street and get an easy fix to the housing crisis, the government is looking to water that right down and remove that protection, and actually only have it for the last pub in a town or village. And so, if you've got 5 pubs, 4 of them could very, very easily be converted. And we could see what we call the tour of destruction that was happening, was it 15 and 20 years ago, where pubs were just, overnight almost closed and turned into a flat or an HMO or a supermarket or something like that. And there was nothing the local community could really do to stop it. So what we as CAMRA has done, we've got a mail shop that people can go on our website and email their local MP directly using that, because that, other than all the other things we talked about, that's the other big fight that we've got.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so it's come to the time of the podcast where we're introducing a new feature to the podcast where listeners can submit a voice recording question to the current guest that's on. Sorry that you're the first one, Ash. Don't look too nervous, but yeah. So our very, very first question on this new feature is from David Law, and he is asking,
Hi, a question for Ash. Given that 80% of the beer supply market in the UK is controlled by four of the world's largest global brewers, and pubs and microbreweries are closing down in unprecedented numbers, why is it that CAMRA haven't issued a super complaint for market review to the CMA?
So it's a really good question. CAMRA has this super complaint status. It's something we were really proud to attain when we did a number of years ago. And it's a really powerful tool. What we're being careful when we consider using it is it's a very powerful but quite a blunt tool. And so what people might not be aware of, but what we've been trying to shout about is in the budget in 2024, I think it was, at the back end of that year, the government announced an access to market review, very last minute, because we had no idea it was happening. And normally we get a bit of a private message or a quiet word about what might be coming in the budget for us. And what we understand is it was a very late addition by an MP who sort of pushed for it, had heard what we were asking for and say, yes, there is a problem with this access to market. Can we do something? And it sort of got put into there. And so we spent all of 2025 feeding into that, as well as other organisations, CEBRA and others, also fed into this review and trying to make the argument that, yes, there's absolutely an access to market problem, which is one of the major concerns for why pubs are shutting and things like that. So what we do know, what we've heard is that review has been done. It's been completed and it just hasn't been announced. And we're waiting on that. So it's been delayed because there was a reshuffle in the summer last year. When was it? Yeah, at some point, I think the summer last year. And unfortunately, government moves as slow as people might expect. So once there's been a reshuffle and a new minister gets in charge, they've got so many things on their desk. And we know that this access to market is on their desk and they've got competing priorities. So our argument for the last kind of couple of months of last year was this is still a priority. This is a problem. It's not going to go away. You need to publish the outcome of that and tell us what you think, because that can go one of a number of ways. From how we understand the access to market reviews being done, what will essentially happen is if there is a problem, which we have very likely made the argument that there is, and if they agree and the review says, yeah, we recognise there's a problem, then that might then set into motion that they will ask things like the CMA or other organisations within the government, what is it we need to do? What actions can we take to start resolving that problem? They'll start putting a plan together for that. And that's the hope we have. If they turn around and say, no, we don't recognise a problem, we've spoken to you, but actually we think people still get a choice and don't worry about it, well, then CAMRA can go back and start thinking about, well, what's our next step? And the conversation might include, do we consider using the super complainant status alongside going back and talking to all those other organisations we get on with and say, what can we do together to fix this? Because clearly the government hasn't listened. So you sort of go back and go, what's the next step? The trouble is if we use our super complainant status now, we sort of tank that possible thing because it will trump that access to market review. So at the minute, we're sort of in a holding pattern and waiting to see what comes from that. But we always keep it there. We know how important that tool is. We know when we have conversations with government, actually, it's very good to say, we think there's a problem with X. And you sort of wink, nudge, remember that if you don't sort of look into it, we can just force you to look into it. And often we found that not threat, but just pointing out that, we have that possibility usually gets things moving in the way we want.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if the CMA did find a problem, which they should do, is there anything else that can kind of squash that where they can't do anything, i.e., MROs or the PCA?
I'm not aware, no. I think the hardest part actually is government priority. So I don't think there's anything that would stop them, but I think they could easily say, yes, we recognise there's a problem, but that's not important right now. When we've had conversations with government and ministers and civil servants, when we have got them to admit there's a problem, sometimes they'll say yes, but, and the but is usually, the big one last year was tickets. When Oasis tickets came out and there was that accusations of price gouging and things like that, they said, for a government, that's a quick win. They can turn around and say, look, there's a big media problem there. If we resolve that and say we'd fix ticket prices, great, we've got to win. So I can see why they've got other priorities. They're a government. They've got a million and one things to look about and think about. Our job is to say, no, ours is the biggest priority. And that's sort of what our job is.
Yeah, so basically looking for quick wins to make them look good, rather than taking on something that might take a bit longer because it's a complex.
Yeah, and it's that impact, isn't it? Any organisation, when they're looking at what do, they should really look at, people feel if we resolve this, that there's an impact there? And I can understand them picking the things, particularly as a government that is not the most popular, picking the things that do that sort of, is it, is it like grocery economics and sort of things that make you feel like you've got a bit more money in your pocket and that you're being listened to, which is very easy with things like that, as opposed to, oh, we're going to resolve a complex thing in pub industry, which, you might not even notice as a problem, which is where CAMRA's job as an educator is to say, there really is a problem. If we can mobilise our 150,000 members to know there's a problem and the millions of pub goers and tell them there's a problem, then that's several million people that can turn around to their local MP in the government and say, there's a problem and I want you to fix it. And that's how you get it high up the agenda.
Yeah, definitely. It's key. I think key is getting the consumers, the drinkers, aware of the issue and actually stepping back and thinking, why am I drinking this same beer and why is it everywhere? And
it's similar in price. One of the things I've really been passionate about changing is changing people's argument of, oh, I'm paying £5, £6, £7 a pint sometimes in places. Oh, it's because the publican's ripping me off or the brewery's ripping me off. We used to have this thing where everyone just thought, not everyone, but a lot of people thought, key keg beers, which typically were a little bit more, it's the breweries knowing they can get away with charging more. But I've never met, other than former brewer and owner James Watt, I've never particularly met a millionaire brewer or a publican. They sort of go in, as said, it's a passion thing. They're all doing it sometimes at not very good wages at all because they're so passionate about it. No one's making a mint out of brewing or pubs particularly. So what we've been trying to change is actually educating people on why the price of your pint is so much. Yes, we recognise as a consumer organisation that we knew 6-7 years ago that most Brits thought pints were too much. But you can't fix that by just demanding breweries charge less or pubs charge less. It's educating people actually so much of your pint is made up of all these different things that they've got no control over. And so you have to pay that for it to be a viable business, but recognising that it's not a viable business if your consumers can't afford to pay that. And how do we work together to resolve that issue?
Yeah, exactly. Micro pubs are thriving though. I think, speaking to at BeerX, speaking to a member of CAMRA, micro pubs are the ones that are keeping independent cask alive, because obviously they're independents themselves. Do you think they're kind of a saving grace for independent breweries and being able to give that choice of cask beer to drinkers?
I think so, yeah. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it goes back to that demonstrating that if you give people the drinks that they want and they're asking for, then the pub thrives and survives. Yes, micropubs have some other sort of benefits from, usually lower sort of overheads and stuff, which might make them a bit more viable. But ultimately, it comes down to micropubs, when they first started all those years ago and became successful, is because people went, oh, great, there's a place where I can go and they're usually serving 3 or 4, if not more, interesting beers. And it's a sort of pub I want to go into when maybe everything around them had these tied lines and they could now only get national brands or even international brands. And they just wanted to drink something local and interesting. And micropubs popped up to answer that question. So the market does come up with answers if it's allowed to. When those planning permission laws were changed, micropubs became much easier to open and they suddenly just popped up all over the country. It was because there was a demand, and they're still successful and they're still amazing because there is a demand. So, in my mind, it seems very simple. Give pubs the choice, and then they'll thrive better. For every pub that's closed down by a pubco or something like that, and they go, oh, it wasn't viable anymore. And then you speak to the people in the area and they say, yeah, it became ran down. Maybe it wasn't kept up as much because it wasn't invested in. But the other part they always say is, the beers are a bit rubbish. I could only drink X and Y and Z major brands, and at least give them the option. If they've got the option to buy what they want, or at least a little bit at the bar and buy what they want and serve that, then they've got a chance of survival. And micropubs have proved it.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be something to use as an example to give your, why access to market is needed, because the proof is in the pudding. Micropubs are doing amazing by selling independent beer, cask beer. If it was on a bigger scale in bigger pubs, it would have the same effect. And pubs will thrive again because there's more option on the bar.
I think, and the example of that is Wetherspoons, which I know is not everyone's cup of tea, but I tend to visit one every so often. I quite like it. And the reason I go in, and the reason plenty of people go in, is because they often have a really good choice of independent beer. I visited one on my way up to Beer Exit, the one at Birmingham New Street Station. Popped in for a quick pint while I was waiting for a train, and there was 4 or 5 independent beers. Now, I was able to check on Cedar's website and say, yeah, this is definitely an independent beer, who it is, because I've not heard of them. So great, I'll take that one. Went and sat on my pint and drank it in there, and it was great. And I spoke to brewers who do, I know some brewers don't like Wetherspoons, but the ones that do often say, well, actually, it gives them that opportunity to get out to market and buying at scale in a way that actually helps them survive.
Yeah, I think speaking to a lot of people that have got their beers into Wetherspoons, they don't really make any money. If anything, they're losing money. But you kind of look at it as a way of, this is great advertising for our brewery. Yes, we're going to take a hit, but we're going to get our beers out to over X amount of pubs that Wetherspoons own. And that is a tool that you can't really put a price on, I would say. And to be honest, Wetherspoons, their sellers are amazing. They keep their cask beer really good. I know this because I've worked for them 15 years myself. So, not my choice of pub to go to, but I know if I do go in there for a cask beer, it's going to be of high quality and it's not going to be off, and it's going to be managed and kept well. So, yeah. So, what's exciting you most in UK at the moment in beer-wise? What's exciting you?
Really difficult question, because I've sort of spent all this time talking about what's not going well. And you know what? I don't actually like being a negative campaigner. It's a really difficult thing, because I think if you spend too much time telling people it's all doom and gloom and all the pubs are going to close and all the beers could be rubbish, people sort of lose hope and go, well, I'll just stay at home then. What's the point? It's never going to be fixed. And it's a bit like when people talk about the environment. If you say, well, the planet's done for if we go 1 degree over, and you all feel a bit helpless and don't really do anything. I think the same with pubs. So I do try to be positive. From a very sort of internal view, the last 12 months, I've been really excited by CAMRA Northern Ireland. We recently, a year or so ago, we turned that into a region on its own. It used to be coupled with Scotland, not really very fairly. They're not the same place. They're not connected. Yes, transport might slightly better, but they're very distant. But we decoupled those, getting that autonomy, and actually they've really flown in terms of demonstrating what can be done when you give people that autonomy. So for people not familiar, Northern Ireland has some very draconian licensing laws. So you can only get it's called the surrender principle, where you can only get a new license if a pub closes and they sell that on or something like that. You can't just go and open a pub like you can in the rest of the United Kingdom.
And the licensing fees are expensive as well, aren't they?
Yes, they're incredibly expensive. They're all majority owned by the global players who don't want to give them up, because why would they want to give up space to the competition? And it's all sort of come about from a very historical reason of not a great place. There's no benefit to this system. I can't see, and CAMRA's argument's always been, there's no benefit to it. It doesn't benefit choice. It doesn't benefit consumers. It's not going to suddenly, if you open it up, result in a pub on every corner and everyone being drunk out of their face 99% of the time, because that's not how it is in the rest of the countries. Yeah, we've got our argument against it, but giving them that sort of autonomy, they've been able to really push back on it. Unfortunately, we didn't get the result we wanted when it was put to the Northern Ireland Assembly, but they have been really good at kind of activating members and getting them to volunteer and to run a brilliant beer festival and educate people in Belfast about this problem and drive people to campaign. So it's not a success yet, but it's been a real sort of catalyst for potential future success. That really excites me from a CAMRA point of view. I think from a general beer point of view, I think what we talked about in terms of people just being aware in general, it's maybe not an exciting topic, but as I said, 5 years ago, chatting to people in the pub and trying to talk to them about the issues with what's going on in the market, and people just didn't know. They were completely oblivious. But I feel we're now at a starting point. You can talk to a lot of people in the pub or publicans and say, oh, the problems. And they say, yeah, and I've heard about this in the newspapers, or I've seen the CAMRA post or a CEBA post or whatever it might be, or listen to a podcast that's giving them that sort of base knowledge. And now they're interested. They recognize the problem. So I think if we get it right, I'm excited by the possibility that in the next couple of years, we could really maybe enfranchise and empower people to make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. What trends are you optimistic about? What do you think the new trends will be?
Can I be really boring and say bitter? I've seen a little bit of an uptick in bitters sort of coming back. They never went away. They were always brewed, but I think they're becoming a bit more popular again, particularly across generations, which I quite like. Because I think 5-10 years ago, there became a thing where bitter was a really uncool and unsexy word. And the marketing teams at some of the global breweries decided that saying bitter was never going to sell a beer because that's not a very nice word. And they all started using amber and all these sort of warmer words, which I don't get, because bitter is a fantastic word for a beer, because that's what it is and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm really excited by the potential. It's a fledgling trend. It's just starting, but I'm seeing more breweries starting to produce it. I'm seeing talk about it online. And so that, for me, in the most sort of boring, maybe typical CAMRA way, I'm excited about bitter coming back.
So what should CAMRA members feel positive about in the future?
I think that we turned a corner. That's the positivity for me. So as I said, last year was really difficult, and I got a lot of CAMRA members get in touch with me, directly. And I'm always happy if people want to email me and say, this is what I'm thinking, or they grab me in the pub. It's always great to be recognised, because a lot of the time people don't. They talk about CAMRA in a very abstract way, and I have to go, no, I'm involved. I do that. So, I think when people got in touch last year with me and spoke to me, a real outpouring of emotion about disappointment and frustration, the difficult year we had. I think most people recognise, as much as we sort of saw the iceberg coming, when you see it, you can't do a lot to steer away from it other than sort of mitigate that. And I hope people recognise that we did as much as possible to mitigate that. We took the big and drastic measures we needed to make sure 2025 was sort of minimise the damage. And 2026, we're expecting to post a surplus as an organisation well into the future with that. So as a business, we've sort of keep going, we're on an even keel, and I will stop using boat analogies at some point. And then that has given us that opportunity, as I said earlier, to talk about that strategy. And what I want them to be excited about is next month when I present this new strategy and we talk about the exciting things CAMRA wants to achieve in the next 3 years, I'm hoping that they'll feel invigorated and they'll recognise and say, yes, you really kind of focus this down to 10, 12 points of things that will make a difference, both sides of the bar, in terms of choice, in terms of price, in terms of viability of these businesses, and that they then feel empowered and recognise how they can get involved. I think that's the big thing. We have a lot of members who in branches who say, well, what is it we should be doing? And I can't tell 140,000 people, 200 branches exactly what to do, because it all matters what's going on in their area. They need to recognise and work it out. So what we focused on is giving them this framework and saying, this is what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. This is the context we're working in. This is the framework for you to then go away and say, well, what are these things that are actually most important in our area? And what do we want to focus on and how we do that, and give them the tools to do that. So hopefully they're excited to do that.
Yeah, good. I'm looking forward to the outcome of the meeting next month to see where you're heading. Younger drinkers starting to come back in pubs. You see a lot more of them.
Yeah, we had a bit of doom and gloom on that, didn't we? A couple of years ago, where all the stats were Gen Z don't drink and they're never going to the pub. And to be fair, even my couple of my wife's siblings who had just turned 18, 19. I remember we took them to the pub 3 or 4 years ago and they were buying hot chocolates, and you thought, oh no, this. I mean, you drink what you want. You're still putting money behind the bar. We were putting money behind the bar at their age. They often don't have their own money or hope someone else will pay. But I was a bit worried, going, I'm seeing in real time this supposed trend of Gen Z not drinking. Yeah, the stats we've looked at suggest that actually, they are starting to pick up, and I think there was a growth in cask drink in Gen Z, and they're drinking more than the previous. That's really fantastic. And this goes back to that sort of, if bitters come back and people drink cask, that's really good. And it shows that sometimes you can't force a trend. We've had years of people saying, well, how do we get them drinking more cask beer or just going to the pub? And the trouble is, if you sort of push too hard, it becomes that Steve Buscemi meme of, how do you do, fellow kids, of sort of trying to get down with them and do them. People say, go on TikTok and do some things. And they go, no, what Gen Z do not need to see is anyone, I'm 10, 15 years older than them, never mind how old some people be involved, coming and telling them how cool cask beer is on TikTok. No, you might as well tell them never drink cask beer, because that's the result. But on their own, they've sort of found it and discovered it, a bit like we saw Guinness last year. And I think actually, we're starting to see a trend on social media. I'm seeing pubs becoming cooler again. I'm seeing so much content being created about pubs and sometimes it's a bit self-deprecating or jokey about pubs. That's fine. We're still talking about pubs. And sometimes it's just genuine enthusiasm. Some of the most enthusiastic people about pubs online are of the younger generation. They're going in and they're making these review videos, or they're talking about the beers they're drinking, or even getting involved in sometimes the heritage aspects of pubs and things like that. And they're finding that fascinating. So, yeah, you sort of, hopefully, if we let them discover it themselves and we're just there ready, if they want to join CAMRA, we'll make ourselves aware to them, there is an organisation there that's interested and will support you on that journey. But otherwise, if they just want to go do it on their own, I'm more than happy for them to go and get a couple of
Yeah,
pints.
it's about creating an experience for the Gen Z generation. I think they like an experience and they like a bit of history, like to tell a story and to their mates. Oh, I went to this place, went to this pub, and it's got it's been standing since 1650 or whatever. They want that, and that's if they've got that experience, got that story, they will do a lot more posts online and about.
Exactly. And I think maybe where we can support and other organisations is helping pubs to tell that story. CAMRA's got an amazing database of information on pubs. Just on our website, you can look up and put in your local, and it'll probably, if it's got historical interest, it'll have that there. Or whether the landlady's been there 25 years, or if it's a traditional Irish, or whatever it might be about that building, it's probably on our website. And so we need to position ourselves as that kind of support. Either if it's straight to the people who are interested, or if it's talking back to the pubs and saying, here's all this information, here's the window to advertise yourself and get that information out there. What can we say about you? It tells a story, and vice versa. What can maybe CAMRA tell you, because you might not realise this from the 80s about your pub because you weren't here, that we can tell you that you can then use to market yourself to that generation.
Yeah, it's definitely, Cask is definitely it's gaining traction. There's a recent MP recently, I think it was this week, was it? Who mentioned Cask beer being cultural heritage, brought it up in Parliament. So that was a win, I feel. I thought that kind of quietened down a bit since the first, big, massive push to make it from Johnny from the Craft Beer Channel to push it to make it cultural heritage. And it seems to be gaining a bit more traction now.
Yeah, I think what we've been very successful at is making sure that we keep Cask in the minds of MPs and things like that. They can get very, as I said, there's a lot of things. They can get very easily distracted about whatever is today's front page headline. And you're right, when Johnny was working on that fantastic campaign, we saw a lot of people talking about pubs and beer. Then it went quiet. And then when the budget came out and it was all on the front pages, and then it goes quiet again because something else comes along. And unfortunately, particularly with things like business rates, it did feel like the government sort of went, well, let's see what we can get away with giving them. And if we just wait, it'll move on and we'll talk about something else. And that, unfortunately, feels the way. But it's never quite gone away. And that's what we do when we do our campaigning. We talk to the lawmakers and things like that. We always say, keep just pushing the cause of why it's so important to people. That's why it's then fantastic when they bring it up. As I said before, the bit in the budget about the access to market review was because of a conversation someone had with an MP and said, oh, this is a problem. And that had stuck in their mind. And then they eventually, however many months or even years later, mentioned it to the Treasury and said, no, I want that in there because that's important. That's one person moving that along and getting that done. This tweet talking about the heritage thing just keeps it in people's mind, keeps it people talking about it, keeps it in the decision-making chain. So we can make a difference. So yeah, it's absolutely fantastic when they talk about it.
What's another example of great cask beer you've had recently?
I'm going to give a big shout out to the Craven Arms in Birmingham. First of all, it came second in our Pub of the Year competition this year, and John, who runs the place with his family, he just had his 70th birthday, and they had we combined it. So he had a 70th birthday party that he'd done a bit of a takeover his favourite beers, and then we did our Pub of the Year silver presentation to him on the same day. And the beers were fantastic. Like, it is a really good example of just what classic cask beer sort of is. Even if the beers, sometimes a bit interesting. Bathams, he had one of the big massive Bathams on, but then he would have it alongside a really interesting stout or something like that. And in this pub, that is a historically interesting and important pub run by Black Country Ales. It was just a really good beer with really good friends, and it's sort of why I do this. It can get really difficult at my end of CAMRA. It feels like all I do is meetings and emails and not really actually drinking a lot of beer because you've got to be sober and make big decisions.
And that's supposed to be the best part, right?
Yeah. So, no, I just took years off drinking, basically, while I do this. I'll get to go back to
teetotal.
But yeah, so, when I get a chance to do that, and it was just a really good night with really good friends, really good beer, a really good pub. And for me, that stood out. The other one I thought was Beerex. Up in Liverpool the other week for that. And, when you've got all these amazing brewers in one room and a lot of them have got their beers on the bar, that's central in the exhibition hall, it's fantastic to see so much cask on there and so many interesting and good quality casks from a lot of small and independent brewers. Because, yes, it's been harder. Sometimes, some of the brewers I used to see in pubs 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started drinking cask, I don't see as much anymore. They're not getting out to market. If I use the example of Tiny Rebel, I can't remember the last time I saw Tiny Rebel on cask. And yet, when I turned 18, 19, 20, maybe a little older, I remember Tiny Rebel being everywhere. And then it sort of disappeared, and then you don't see as much variance. And so to see so many breweries bringing so much cask and really being passionate about it, for me, I didn't drink cask all night. I like all beers, but I drank plenty of it as well.
Yeah. What's your favourite cask at BeerX?
I'm terrible for detail.
There was one that stood out for me. It was Grain Brewery, Slate, I think it was called.
Okay.
Oh, it was beautiful, 6%, and I didn't even know it was 6% until I had my third helping of it, and I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe it's slow down a bit on this one."
Yeah, I think I would have to be careful though, like that events like that. So I spoke at 5:00, and so when I first got there, I drank the no and lows, and that's 3.8. I think was the highest I went beforehand. Going to table beer, and so then it was only afterwards that I started dabbling with the stronger stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely some beautiful beers there at BeerX. Better than last year. The quality was amazing. So we're going to end up on this final question. What should CAMRA drinkers and anyone in particular listeners be excited about when it comes to cask beer?
I think that everyone should be excited about how passionate everyone is. I think, this conversation today and how, what's been going on in the industry and all these people starting to talk together and work together and actually sort of, recognize that we need to work together is a really exciting thing, because it's not the disparate sort of competing priorities that it used to be. We're now all starting to recognize that we might only have one chance to really make a difference. If we keep arguing or keep just doing slightly different things, we might not get what we want. We'll recognize we've got to work together. So I hope that people are really excited by the fact that everyone who cares recognizes what we need to do and how we need to work together. And so I think this is probably, even though things are tougher than they have been, I think in many years other than the pandemic, I think this is actually a really exciting potential for us to make a difference.
Yeah, and a bit of patience as well, I feel is needed. A bit of patience.
And Rome wasn't built in a day. I do get that a lot. It is, why isn't this fixed? And I go, because I don't have a magic wand. If I could, I would. I'd do it immediately. And trust me, everyone who knows about this problem knows it's a problem. But you can't force the government to make the changes you need. You can't force pubcos to make the changes you need. All these different elements, you just need to work on them little by little. And that's the campaigning style CAMRA takes. I do get some people who say, you need to be even more combative. Because when I took over, I said, we need to be a bit more combative. We can't accept little crumbs of success. It needs to be bigger, actual needle moving things. And hopefully that's what we sort of started to work towards. But people still push and they say, well, you need to be even more combative. You need to push back. You need to tell them they're wrong. And I do see other campaigners who, I don't mind, they take the position of, they get to be the ones who maybe say the meaner words and they're a little bit more combative. And, and I think that's good at generating awareness of an issue. CAMRA sort of positions itself as, we need to, you keep your enemies close, or even not your enemies, the people you need to change the minds of. You don't want them to feel ostracized by you. You don't want them to feel that you don't want to have a conversation with them. You need to be able to sit down, even if it is, the pubcos who might not be doing things we like sometimes, or the government who might not have made the budget decisions we like. We need to dialogue. It's dialogue of telling them why they're making the wrong decision, why it's not in their interest, not even not in our interest, not in their interest what they're trying to do. Long term, it's going to cause a problem, whatever it might be, and convince them. And if we can't convince them, going and finding the levers we can pull, at government level and making policy changes that force people to do the things that will benefit us. But again, you only get that by keeping people on your side.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to wrap up? Anything you want to mention before we call it a day?
I think the only thing I'll really push is just keep going to your local CAMRA beer festival. So we announced at the start of the year that all CAMRA members now get free entry to CAMRA beer festivals. What we're hoping is that will drive people to join CAMRA. So if you're not a member of CAMRA and you think, well, that's a fantastic deal, because it is, £30 a year, and you get free entry to 200 festivals around the country if you've got the time and the patience to do that.
Yeah, if you've got the time.
So yeah, you're saving, and even if you go to 4 or 5 festivals, or you go to your local festival 3 times or something, you're probably already making a saving there. So I think that's a really exciting policy in terms of encouraging people to keep going down and enjoying the festival. So if you're not a member, do join. If you are a member, go and enjoy that. There's a little caveats you might have to check and book beforehand, just so they can make sure they've got room for you. So check the local branch website, whatever it might be, or social media for the details. But yeah, free festival entry everywhere is our new exciting policy. So go and enjoy that and drink as many weird and wonderful beers as moderately
Drink responsibly.
Responsibly. And otherwise, if people are coming to Members Weekend or thinking about coming to Members Weekend, or if you're not a CAMRA member and want to join and come to Members Weekend, then again, that's going to be a really exciting time at St Albans. And if you're in the area and you're not a member, I'm sure you can take part, because the team who are organising it have basically they've called it the City of Ale. St Albans is being sort of turned over, and all the pubs are running events, beer festivals, basically every pub, with live bands every night, and there's meet the brewers and trips. And it's fantastic. It's the most exciting Members Weekend I've ever seen. For all the stuff outside the hall, there is we do the conference and the AGM and stuff, people come to that. But even if you just want to come to the city, not as a CAMRA member, but you're maybe adjacent, you live in the area and you've always wondered, come along and enjoy the exciting events, and that should be fantastic as well.
Awesome. Have you got all the fringe events going around St Albans up on the site as well?
Yeah, so if you go on the main CAMRA website, or I think even if you just Google St Albans City of Ale, they've got their own dedicated website, and some things you might need to book, or I think there's even like museum talks that you can go to about history. It's so diverse. It's really exciting. And I think it goes to show what we can do when we make events more exciting and accessible, because I think we're going to see a really high uptake of people attending this year.
Awesome. Yep. And if you do want to become a member of CAMRA, check out the description below. The links will be there for you to have a look. Ash, I think that's it. We call it time. Many thanks for coming back on the show, and we'll make it a threesome next year, and we'll come back this time next year and see the progress that CAMRA's made, and hopefully what the government have made as well. We'll have you back next year. Awesome. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you for everyone who's been listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, share. Yeah. Until a couple of weeks' time, we'll see you again soon. So yeah. Till then. Cheers. Bye bye.